right, hello everyone. Today I'm joined by Lucy. How do you say your surname?
Feighery. Yeah, it's
Feighery.
really difficult to pronounce. Even
I
Irish people can't pronounce it.
thought it was safer to ask you. It's Lucy Feighery, and Lucy has a YouTube channel. It's called Mind Body Integrate, is it?
Yeah.
Mind Body Integrate, and she talks about her recovery from severe long COVID and shares things to help other people recover. She's been on Red and Eagle. We were just talking about other channels that we've both been on, speaking about mind body healing. And a lot of people mentioned Lucy when I was asking about who would be cool to have a conversation with in this space. So thanks so much for joining me, Lucy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've also heard your name mentioned, and it sounds like you share similar sort of content. So it's great to be able to connect and chat.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I love these kind of conversations. It's always fun to dive in and see where we connect. Um, so I guess the easiest is always just to start with your journey, maybe your a little bit about your story, how it started, and yeah, let's take it from there.
Yeah, sure. So I got long COVID in early 2020. So it's February 2020. I
Okay, wow.
also, before that, had chronic pain. So I didn't realize there was any connection.
Mm,
But then subsequently, this approach helped me with recovering from chronic pain as well.
mm,
Um, but the chronic pain was more of a like it did get in the way of my life, but it wasn't nearly as significant as like my experience with long COVID. And it was also for me diagnosed as chronic fatigue syndrome.
okay.
So yeah, so when it started, it was a relatively mild infection. I was actually at a meditation retreat just before I caught COVID. I probably caught COVID at the meditation retreat.
Oh, no
Um,
way. What what
so
what meditation retreat was it? Sorry, just curious.
so yeah, it was really good actually. It was a meditation in retreat in Devon in the UK.
Okay.
Um, there's a place called Gaia House,
Mm,
which does meditation retreats, and they do a lot of online meditations as well. I'd really recommend it to anyone who's interested. Um, and it was just at the beginning of the pandemic when like
mm.
we were hearing about COVID, but like no one was wearing masks and no one really understood like what the impact of the virus would be.
Yeah, February
Uh,
2020. That's really early. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so I think I don't know, I might have caught something, I might have caught it there, or like I also traveled on multiple busy trains and through busy train stations on my way home as well. And so it was like initially just pain or kind of discomfort breathing. And also like I felt unwell, I felt tired. I had lots of like chest pain. And yeah, I thought it was just something that would go away with like a couple of
Mm.
weeks, just like resting a bit more after work, resting more on the weekends. Um, but then it just kind of kept getting worse, or the symptoms didn't get away, the kind of
Yeah.
fatigue got a lot worse. And basically, yeah, just started to wonder, like, could this, because I knew about chronic fatigue syndrome at the time, like, I knew
Okay.
that, like, viruses could last and could go on for a long time. So I was wondering in the back of my mind, could it be something like that?
Mm.
But for that first year, it was less impactful than the second year. So I
Mm.
was still able to work. I wasn't able to work my normal hours, but I was able to work. I had to stop going to the gym. If I went for a walk, like at the beginning, there were a few times when I tried to exercise normally and like noticed the impact was just
Mm.
crazy. So I reduced my activity level. I started doing more meditation. I started doing breathing exercises, trying to pace. And I generally kind of, I think I slowly improved a bit throughout that year.
Okay.
But then late in the year got a lot worse. So yeah, I suppose there were various stressful things that were happening at the time.
Mm.
I'd started a new job. and I found it really hard to take any sick leave. So I was just really pushing through, and I was starting to get a lot of orthostatic intolerance
Yeah.
and migraines. So I was like trying to work through a migraine and
Okay.
trying to work through like a lot of fatigue. And yeah, so then eventually it got too bad to work and I took time off. Um, and so and then I decided, so at the time I was living in the UK and I moved back to Ireland thinking I'd just have like 2 weeks or I thought like 1 or 2 months to rest, recover, and like then I'll be fine again. I'll go
Yeah.
back to and I was kind of like I had a doctor's appointment arranged, or at least I was arranging a doctor's appointment to see a specialist in Dublin. And I thought like when I got the letter to say it was going to be like in a month's time, I was like, oh no, I don't have that much time. Like I need it, I need the appointment
Right.
now. I need to get back to work. So my state of mind was very much like, yeah, I urgently need to get better. And I just need like this just needs to go away.
Mm,
So I was quite anxious and it was quite stressful because my family didn't really understand it.
mm.
Um, and like they'd suggest going for a walk or um like yeah, they just didn't really understand that like actually activity was really, really hard for me.
Yeah.
Um, so that year was the worst year. Like I spent most of my time in bed. I was really reactive to little things like reading. Um, yeah, I downloaded Duolingo and I played like for a couple of minutes practicing like basic Spanish, and that gave me a migraine. Like very small
Mm,
things would trigger my symptoms. And I think I was just really scared of getting worse, really scared that like,
mm.
oh, I need to go to hospital. Like, what if I'm like too fatigued to feed myself? What if like
Yeah.
all of those kind of typical worries? Um, yeah, and so like that year was pretty gloomy because it was very isolating,
Mm,
um, being able to socialize and yeah, just kind of the uncertainty. I was trying lots of different things like gut microbiome testing,
mm.
different diets. Um, yeah, then the following year I improved a little bit. So 2022, I was able to walk around the house. I was able to read more. I was doing a bit more research. I was looking into like different online programs.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and so basically I was it like my quality of life was a lot better, even though I was still very limited in what I could do.
Mm. Did you find anything helped that transition? So that phase where you were like probably at your worst and then things started to, like you said, your quality of life starts to improve. Was there anything um,
Mhm.
that you felt like changed that helped that approach or that kind of change to happen?
Yeah, so it was actually a medication, and I don't know
Okay.
how much it was the medication or not because I had placed a huge amount of hope on like that this medication was going to help me. And
Yeah.
I think I was like building up to my doctor's appointment. He had said he'd prescribe it. And there was like maybe 2 months in the space that I had to wait before he wanted me to try something else first. Um, and that medication's LDN, low dose naltrexone.
Yeah. Okay. I've heard of it. Yeah.
So yeah, and like looking back, like maybe it did help me. I don't know for sure because I'm
Mm,
also like it could have been to do with my expectation. It could have been placebo. I know like some people try that and they don't find it helpful or they get like bad side effects. So it's hard to know, but at the time, that's what I thought had helped me.
mm.
And um, it was, and it did happen quite quickly where it was just before Christmas, and I was thinking, like, there's no way I'll be able to wrap Christmas presents. Like, I just definitely won't have the capacity to do that. And I started taking it that week, and I was like amazed that I could wrap Christmas presents, that I could even go downstairs on Christmas Day. So it was really good in terms of just lightening the load of the
Mm, mm.
symptoms. to have that shift and that change.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so and also I think just being able to socialize a little bit more.
Mm,
Uh, it would still impact me to leave the house. So like my friends might visit me for an hour or something. But it was yeah, nice to feel like I could do a little bit more and walk around the house.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it makes a big difference to have that kind of just new kind of stimulation of somebody coming around or being able to move around a bit as well.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
what were your perspectives on recovery at the time? Had you found any? Because like for me, I remember this phase where I was like kind of at my worst and then started to head in the right direction. What was really helpful was like kind of finding recovery stuff online, like more of the positive stuff, like Ray and Nagel's YouTube channel. And yeah, how was that in your journey? Like, were you? What was your perspective on recovery, and how did that shift at all?
Yeah, so I think I always had a feeling that it would be possible. I suppose there was maybe sometimes when I felt I think the year of 2021, when I was in bed and I was
Mm,
really debilitated, I also had like another health scare during that time, and I was
okay.
waiting months for results. So I think at that time I wasn't very hopeful, and I was
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
thinking, I can't deal with like any additional health things on top of this.
yeah.
Um, but during the next year, I was quite open to different things. So like the work that I used to do was in the area of psychology. And like I was open to the idea that the mind or mindset could play
Mm,
a big role.
mm,
But I also couldn't fully like connect it to my own experience. So
right.
for instance, like I'd come across a lot online about the fear cycle, where like fear might exacerbate symptoms and then you might feel more fearful and then the symptoms get worse.
Yeah.
And I could understand that logically, and I could understand that it like did apply to me in certain situations, but it didn't match every time that my symptoms increased.
Mm,
Um, so there were some times when I was really positive and really like, um, yeah, just didn't notice any fear and tried something optimistically, and then I'd get symptoms afterwards. And so I think, and I also maybe felt like some information or books on that were like over simplistic, or like I
mm,
kind of, oh, if it was this simple,
mm, mm.
like I could just apply it to myself and it would work,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
it would make more sense. It would fit my experience better if it was as simple as some people, like some resources or sources are making it out to be.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's one thing to get that perspective on the intellectual level, and then when it actually comes to your direct experience, it's like, okay, sure, in theory it's simple, but there's a lot going on kind of physically that's not so easy to just kind of shift. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also it's one of these things that like your symptoms are so physical and real and
Mm,
debilitating in the sense that like it can be really hard when you're experiencing those symptoms to even like connect that they could be caused by like an emotion or by
yeah,
fear or by something psychological.
yeah.
And I think also like it depends on like I don't know what your experience was like, but like because some of my family didn't understand when I was unwell,
Mm,
um, they were kind
mm,
of pointing to the idea that like, oh, this is mind over matter, or
mm.
this is like in your head. So I think like certainly I wasn't going to share any information about this with them because I was
Right,
like, that's
right.
I'm not going to get it and it will feed into
Yeah, it's going to
like
feel the wrong perspective, kind of. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it'll be like a misconception. And I
Mm,
think
mm,
really needed to come across
mm,
the right information or the information that made sense for me uh,
mm,
in order for it to like land and for me to feel validated
mm,
and like it was not just like an ABC simple solution either, because I think it's
mm,
not so simple. It's like even though it is on the one hand, or it can
Mm,
be for some people, it's also not, um, yeah, like it's like so many people wouldn't be really unwell if it was a
mm.
simple solution to get better.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's one of the biggest kind of uh tensions maybe in the kind of chronic illness recovery and mind body healing space is so many people have that experience of kind of having their illness invalidated early on by people not understanding it. And then we kind of come to that tension when it's you come across these mind body healing approaches, and then it's like you said, it's like balancing that where it's like, okay, the physical symptoms are very real. I'm not making this up. But uh and that's why I think a lot of people are closed off to these kind of techniques. But um yeah, I think it's very key finding the resources that are going to resonate, like that are going to make it make sense to you, to bridge that gap to where it's like, oh, okay, yeah, it's not all in my head, but the roots of the kind of physical symptoms might be a lot more emotion based and kind of
Mhm.
coming from a mind related route. Yeah. So I can totally relate to that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also it's like maybe some particular sources that talk about this approach are really definitive about every detail. And I think
Mm,
it's like nice to shed light on the complexity or like
mm,
be open, like to have like an openness to skepticism as well, because
yeah.
like it's really about like figuring it out, like how you can believe it yourself.
Yeah.
That's kind of
Yeah.
the most important thing. So just having someone tell you this is how it is, like might not be enough. It might need
Yes.
to like
Yeah.
resonate more personally or with your experience, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was, would you say, like the were the resources or the books that were really helpful in kind of making it make sense to you, getting on board with the mind body understanding?
Yeah, so uh, the book that really was most impactful for me was The Mind Body Prescription by John Sarno.
Okay.
Um, and the reason for that, or like, I suppose it's interesting because I think the timing of that was just that I hadn't come across the idea of repressed emotions playing a role in this.
Right.
And that was like the key idea in the book for me that
Yeah.
like was, oh, okay, this is like something I can be interested in or curious about or try to figure out how that could apply to me.
Mm,
Um, and so I think going back to that example of like having experiences where I was really optimistic and enthusiastic about like say going for a short walk and then symptoms getting worse, then I could start to consider, okay, could some of the emotions have been out of my awareness,
mm,
um, that were impacting me in those moments. And yeah, so it just kind of opened a door where I could like start to consider this a
mm.
bit more thoroughly, I suppose. And I don't know why it kind of resonated, the idea of repressed emotions, because you don't know if you're not aware of emotions because you're not aware of them. But
Yeah, yeah.
like, I don't know for some reason, and I had always thought I was really aware, excuse me,
Right.
aware of my emotions. Like, I really thought like, I had good self-awareness. But it turned out like actually there was like a huge area of my
Yeah.
emotional experience I wasn't noticing. But yeah, I also read before that I read a few books on IFS, internal family systems.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that approach?
I have. I didn't engage with it too much myself, but I've heard quite a few people speak about it, yeah, in the healing
Yeah, so
space, yeah.
it's the idea of like having different parts,
Mm.
and even some like brain retraining programs like use the IFS language in terms of like achiever part, people pleaser part,
Yeah, yeah.
part. Um, So I kind of combined that approach to reflect on emotions that might have been under the surface for me.
Mm.
So it was like thinking, does any part of me feel anxious about going for a walk, for instance? And like my initial feeling might be like I'd kind of reflect and I think, like, no, I don't think so. Like it would be
Mm,
just like I'd have to kind of ask again or
mm,
reflect again. Like, does a tiny part of me feel a bit like anxious about what might happen if I go for a walk, given like everything that's happened before? So I think it just gave me a tool to use
mm. Yeah.
for reflecting on emotions. And yeah, so and it was I suppose it was kind of interesting timing because maybe if I hadn't been reading about IFS, I would have just used a different approach or I would have thought about like a different way of doing it. Um, like now, like a nice exercise, and um yeah, so I suppose it's just like it was maybe a coincidence that like I had read
Mm.
those books and then could use that in combination with like other mind body tools or ideas.
So like the John Sonner book was kind of almost the opening you up to the repressed emotion aspect of it, and then the IFS stuff was kind of like the coincidental tool that arrived at the same time to help you. Okay, this is how you can dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think the John Sarno book really landed in a sense that I was like, okay, so my body is not damaged. Like
Mm,
actually my body is okay. And even though I may have been somewhat aware of my mindset on that in the past, I don't think it clicked in the same way. So I think at that point I was really like, oh no, I'm actually not doing harm to my body. Like I'm actually okay. You
yeah.
know, my body is okay, even though the symptoms are maybe increasing when I like try
Mm,
to do something. So I think it helped instill a kind of a sense of trust and belief
mm, mm,
that like this is a path that I can use to move forward.
yeah.
Because I think before that the uncertainty about why symptoms were getting worse was just
Mm,
making me feel like unsafe whenever symptoms got
yeah.
worse. You know?
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think yeah, because that trust is such a key thing I found on my own journey and with so many people is like you need to come to the space of because yeah, otherwise we're stuck in those kind of fear cycles, like you mentioned earlier on, where it's like you're having these symptoms and then it increases the fear of like not knowing why and are you getting worse and like is this dangerous and are you going to end up in hospital? And then yeah, to just kind of I think have that understanding of okay, I am actually okay, but maybe there's stuff going on in my nervous system and in my mind that is triggering all of this and I need to work with parts of myself. But I think from that foundation of trust, like it was the same for me. I remember coming to this space eventually where I was like, okay, my mind needs to learn to trust my body and not fight with it. Like, okay, the body is okay. And now I need to learn how to uh meet these parts of myself, meet the symptoms, meet the emotions, the thoughts, and not kind of fight with them anymore. So yeah, I think that that trust is really key. So how did how did things unfold for you from there? So you'd found kind of about the repressed emotions, you started working with the internal family systems, and you were starting to feel a little bit better. You were maybe starting to do a bit more. How did that process of working with the repressed emotions kind of evolve as well?
Yeah, so I suppose that that level of trust really helped me with starting to move forward with doing certain things. Like I hadn't been driving for a really long time. I wasn't sure whether to get insurance from like my insurance had lapsed on my car and I was like, will I get insurance again? And
Mm,
it kind of gave me that like tiny bit of trust. Like I was still feeling really unsure, but it gave me a sense of trust that actually like I can start working towards this and I can try like going for short drives
yeah.
and going for longer walks. I also started running pretty early on, and I think like I
Okay.
was maybe um I think it was maybe a sense of like really wanting to test it. Like,
Mm,
I know it mightn't be right for everyone to like do that, and it depends on the stage of the of your recovery that you're at. But I think one of the things that was really great in that was that I'd had foot pain for like 5 years, a kind of what I thought was something called Morton's neuroma, like a pinched nerve in the ball of your foot.
okay.
Um, and that's what I'd been told it was, and I'd had scans and I'd had injections and it was still there. And when I started running, the I realized like it wasn't sore when I was running on it. And that
Mm,
was like, I don't know, I think because that was a slightly separate like thing to the long COVID. It had started way earlier. There was something really powerful about that evidence that like,
mm,
oh, actually, you know, the pain is not there right now when I'm running. Like even though it would get
mm,
more painful afterwards, and it was kind of moving around. Sometimes it was painful, sometimes it wasn't. And when I started running, like the symptoms really did ramp up. So like there were times I was feeling really like overwhelmed, anxious just after a run, but I worked really hard to just reassure myself like I am safe, I'm okay, my body's
mm,
okay. And I think one of the things that I really focused on was, and this is what the IFS helped me to do that I'd probably never been doing for myself before, was to just hold some like space and compassion
mm.
for whatever feelings were coming up. So
Yeah.
like after going for, and when I say run, it was like a really, really short jog, like, like 400, maybe started like 200 meters, like short jog. And then yeah, afterwards, I would just notice, okay, a part of me feels really anxious because all of these symptoms have increased. A part of me is
Mm,
feeling like a bit frustrated or a bit unsure about if this is okay. Like I
yeah.
would just kind of name what I was experiencing and saying, okay, but it's okay to have these feelings. And then I suppose with like self-compassion can be really helpful. And I think also
Mm,
this model helped me develop self-compassion, the idea that like, oh, it's part of me, so I can be
mm,
compassionate for that part,
yeah.
like nearly as though it's someone else or like just a small part of me, or maybe like a part of me that's been affected more by the challenges I've experienced from being unwell and from symptoms increasing. So
Yeah.
um yeah, so that was really helpful. And I just kind of consistently worked at like slowly increasing what I was doing, checking in with myself regularly, like to see like is there something that I'm not addressing or not aware of, or like how am I really feeling? And it just seemed to work. Like
Mm,
it wasn't perfect. It wasn't like every time I got an answer, but it generally like helped a lot with just consistently using that. And I was also lucky that like at the time my work contract had ended quite a like probably at least a year before then. So like I wasn't like I had time where I wasn't pressured. I mean, like I did want to start working again, but I could just kind of take my time to really focus on recovery
right. Yeah.
and like just like use all my time and energy to do the emotional stuff
Mm,
and to
mm,
help myself with that process of increasing activity.
mm,
And so yeah, I just kind of slowly built up running and swimming um and like going into town, all of the things that like
yeah.
hadn't done for a while.
Yeah. I love that. I love uh the self-compassion kind of approach to working with the different parts of yourself because I found myself in a very similar space and it was a game changer really to learn, I guess, that was the best way to deal with these different parts of myself, whereas for so long I've been fighting with them and like trying to uh you know
Mm.
destroy
And
them. Yeah, yeah.
what helped you develop that sense of self-compassion?
Yeah, yeah, it's funny. I wanted to mention that as well. It's interesting how we all tend to come to similar like end places, but maybe have very different tools that get us along the way. So for me, it wasn't necessarily IFS. It was a mixture. A lot of it was meditation based. So I only discovered meditation because of the whole COVID journey. So like at some point, I worked with somebody who was a mindfulness teacher, and she introduced me to the concept of kind of the same way I guess John Sonner's book opened the idea of uh, there's repressed stuff that you need to feel, and the key was understanding that it was actually good and okay to feel that. Whereas I think for so long a part of me had known. It's kind of like you said as well, where we don't feel like we're repressing something, but when you find somebody talking about it for some reason, it resonates. You know, something in you is like, no, I'm not repressing emotions, but this is very interesting, or this feels very relevant. Um, yeah, and basically, I think that was the introduction, and then from there, I understood that I needed to kind of have this different approach, and a lot of compassion-based meditations were was my introduction, and it worked. So I just carried on doing that and started to develop my own process. But it was I don't know if you know Tara Brach at
Oh
all.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I was listening to I think this lady introduced me. She was like, "Yeah, try this. You need to learn self-compassion." I was like, "Okay, how?" So she was like, "Try one of these meditations." And and it helped. Like I would have all these emotions and thoughts coming up when I was having a crash or something, and then I'd put that on and I'd be like, "Oh, okay, what if I met uh what if I met this with love and acceptance and said it's okay?" So that was one aspect. And then I did the DNRS brain retraining program. I don't know if you've heard of it. Um, yeah, and that was similar. I know people have very mixed experiences with these brain retraining programs, but I think it helped that I was on that path already. And then a lot of the program was around focusing on uh, kind of retraining the response to symptoms. And I think I kind of mixed oh, okay, I've learned the best way to respond to symptoms. So it was quite similar to like you said as well, starting to dive into things quite early on, which can bring mixed results for people for sure. But it's also a great way to start to get some experiential evidence of kind of what's possible and to like trigger the things that you need. Where it was the same for me. I was like, it was also shifting my perspective on symptoms. Where I was like, okay, I actually want to get symptoms. So I want to get very small amount of symptoms. Like I was terrified of raising my heart rate. Like I would have been too scared to go for a run or something. So I was like, let me just jump up and down until my heart rate gets really high. And then the same as you said, like, what's coming up? Is there fear? Is there some like doom thinking of now I'm going to have this, now I'm going to have that, and then can I start to uh, allow? I think what was really helpful for me was understanding the concept of uh, allowing and accepting what was in experience and saying like it's okay, you can be here. I don't need to fix you. I don't need to fight you. And a lot of that came from meditation. Like as that kind of developed, I got more and more interested in meditation and everything. I just started to click where I was like, oh, if I just accept and allow everything that wants to come up, it's not it's not as much of a problem as my mind was making it out to be.
Yeah, it's so interesting how different people will find like a
Yeah,
different ideas, and like they might be like certain programs might help more at one time compared to
yeah,
another time, depending on what you know already or your experience already. And it's really interesting in terms of meditation because my experience was really different because I used to meditate a lot.
yeah. I wanted to ask you about meditation, having come from before
Yeah.
getting sick. Yeah.
Yeah, so I started meditating when I was about 18, and I meditated nearly every day, um like for years. And then when I got long COVID, I was doing some online meditation retreats because I couldn't leave the house. So that was something to do. And I did notice like slight improvements. But I think maybe what was happening for me with meditation, and I don't really fully know, but that it wasn't it was helping me feel calmer, and
Mm,
it was helping like relax my nervous system. but it wasn't helping me access the deeper emotions.
Mm,
Or
mm.
maybe I didn't realize that there were deeper emotions to become aware of.
Yeah.
Um, because I think since I've recovered, even though I would really like to get back to meditation, and I definitely think it's really useful generally, I haven't been meditating much at all. And I think part of that is because um, I was using it as a coping mechanism
Mm,
before,
mm.
like as a kind of a plaster rather
Yeah.
than really getting to the core of what was the main issue. And I think also
Mm,
some of my experience with meditation was I would do a retreat and I'd feel pretty zen and relaxed and good. But then at the end of the retreat, my like heightened awareness would kind of tip into anxiety, and I
mm,
would have really heightened anxiety for a number of days. And I don't know, I hear that that can be common, but I
mm,
don't know again if that's like maybe to do with like not having actually been like aware fully of my emotions at the
mm,
time.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I've experienced similar after meditation retreats because I then went on to go do like a whole bunch of meditation retreats because it resonated so deeply with me. And I think it does quite sensitize the nervous system as well. Like you come out and I've had that like overstimulated experience. But it's interesting. I wonder if, so I'm curious to like a bit more about like what style of meditation were you doing and what got you into it? And yeah, like did you have any interesting experiences with meditation before you got ill? Like any insights or, yeah.
Yeah, so when I started it initially, it was a really powerful experience.
Mm,
I think it was like when I was 18, I would have been doing my end of school exams, and I was really, really anxious about them, really stressed, like, kind of achiever mindset, like I have
yeah,
to do
yeah.
well. Um, and so and because I'd been so anxious, I had avoided studying. I had avoided studying for
Mm,
my exams. So the anxiety was definitely like really heightened because I actually hadn't studied.
right.
Um,
Yeah, I know that feeling.
and I think like my I came across meditation and I realized that actually like it was like a way for me to escape from like the anxiety. And I think
Mm,
it was just like I was meditating so regularly, and it was just like whenever I could really tap into the present moment, could get that awareness that I'm okay right now. Like
mm, mm,
all of the mental stuff is what's causing the anxiety. And if I can
mm,
just become more aware of like this precise moment right now. And it was a really profound experience of like 2 weeks of just being really calm,
mm.
um, really at peace with like the situation. Um, and
What
yeah,
what what gave you that? Like, was it something that you read or something that what gave you that it sounds like it came quite naturally to you, like once something made you aware of this kind of being present without being in
Mhm.
the thoughts. Was it, yeah, what triggered that? Can you remember? Was it like a specific technique or
I
teacher or
think,
anything?
yeah, I think it was a book, and I can't remember which book it was now. Like I actually found it in like a bookshelf in my house. So
Okay.
it must have been like a book someone in my family had, and um yeah, I think it wasn't like really in depth, but it was just talking about like how our thoughts can cause a lot of this like
Mm, mm,
stress and anxiety, and that like paying attention to the present moment can um reduce that.
right, right.
So yeah, so it was really helpful at the time, and then it was also such a positive experience that I saw the value in meditating. So I used to then like try to regularly meditate. Like sometimes I just do like a meditation if I was sitting on a train, as in just, not listen to music and just pay attention to
Mm,
my body or something. Um, and yeah, I was drawn to it because of the general anxiety that I was normally having on a day-to-day basis. It was like
yeah.
a kind of relief that I could yeah, sit and feel a bit more relaxed, I suppose.
Mm, mm. That's fascinating. Yeah, it's funny. There's this teacher that really resonated with me later on once I'd been meditating for a while, and his name's Angelo DeLulo. I don't know if you've come across him at all, and he talks quite a lot about the maybe deeper aspects of meditation. Kind of he calls it like awakening, shifting out of identification with your thoughts and your mind. And it's interesting. I've heard him talk about a lot of people having these shifts, and it generally follows a kind of similar pattern where uh, somebody has this shift into like realizing that they're not their thoughts and that you can kind of the thoughts can be there, but you can still be in this present state of not being triggered by them and not kind of identifying with them, and that can bring like a lot of peace and clarity for a while. And then everybody seems to go through this later stage, which is characterized by the emotion work. And it's funny how randomly it can come about through tragic life circumstances, mysterious and unexpected illnesses, and all of that kind of stuff. So it's funny that you had that meditation experience like very early on, and then later on, when long COVID came, it wasn't so much about meditation. Now it was more about the doing the deeper emotion work. So yeah, it seems to be quite a common theme but it's interesting how differently it plays out for people.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's in some ways I think it's really interesting or nice that I became aware of emotions through a different source, because now I can
Mm,
go back to meditation and like explore awareness of emotions, or
yeah,
like
yeah,
through meditation, like it'll be a slightly different experience. I know some mind body tools like somatic tracking are
yeah.
similar to meditation, but they're also maybe not as in depth as like a long meditation. Um, yeah, so it's interesting. Um, yeah, it's interesting, and I suppose it's what your like your awareness of repressed emotions plays a role as well. Because before,
Mm,
when I was meditating before, I never would have even thought that I had repressed emotions.
yeah.
Whereas now I might have a bit more awareness of what the signs are that
Mm,
there's
mm,
an emotion under the surface that I'm not acknowledging or not really like experiencing.
yeah. Yeah, it's almost like it's a beautiful kind of tool set that's been brought to us in the sense that you can still navigate challenging life circumstances, but and then the body can kind of have certain responses, and then it's like, oh, okay, maybe this, I know what's going on here, and maybe there's something I need to address, or maybe, I've noticed in myself there can still be the tendency to notice like old distraction habits or something like that, and then it's like, wait, there's something underneath this. And then yeah, it's nice to have like so many people mention somatic tracking like on my YouTube videos and stuff. And I guess it's very similar to what I speak about, but it's funny. I also just found it through people talking about meditation. So this guy I mentioned, Angelo, he simplified the emotion work really nicely for me, where he was just like, it all comes down to how much you can get into the physical sensation of the emotion as opposed to the story about it. To like acknowledge the story that it's relevant, right? The mind saying like you're feeling like this because this person did that and that happened, and it's like, okay, cool, that's what the mind's saying. But what's actually, why is that a problem? What don't I want to feel about that? And that simplified it so much for me. It was just like, okay, just get to the kind of uh I was always focusing on resistance. It's like, what am I not allowing? What am I resisting?
Yeah.
And yeah, I suppose it's quite similar to other tools like somatic tracking and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually I came across somatic tracking after I had mostly recovered.
Right.
And I did find it really helpful. But it was just like then an added additional
Yeah.
tool, if you want to call it a tool that you could use then, or that I could use if I wanted to. But I suppose that's the nice thing. There's lots of different ways of doing this
Yeah.
work. There's lots of different things that can be helpful. And for some people, somatic tracking might have been like the first thing they came
Yeah.
across and the main thing that then they used throughout their experience of recovery.
Yeah. I agree. Absolutely. It's so key. Um, for everybody to just kind of trust your own intuition as well. Like, often you listen to a recovery story and it's like, okay, this is how Lucy recovered. I have to do the same thing, or this is how Kyle
Mm,
recovered. I have to
mm,
do the same thing. And I'm sure you've experienced this talking about it. Like, I'll often get questions from people, like, because I would mention how helpful meditation was for me to kind of be with the symptoms and like increase my awareness of how I was getting caught up in my thoughts. And then someone will ask, like, okay, how much meditation do I need to do? But I mean,
mm.
this is a great example of like for some people, maybe that's not like how different it was for you and me. Like maybe that's not what you need. But if you trust your uh kind of intuition and you're open to like what what is resonating, whether it's like an approach that somebody's talking about or a book that sounds interesting, like everyone's going to find their tools. But it might look very different from person to person.
Yeah, and I think it's also really about like the energy you bring to the process as well,
Mm,
because
mm.
like some people, and I would resonate with this, like naturally have like a problem solving mind that's like, oh, how much of this do I do
Yeah,
and how do
yeah,
I do it and am I doing it right? And like, like getting into the minutia of like the how to use the tool and then like over analysis of like using it. Um, but like I think it's kind of learning a new way of being, which
mm,
is
mm,
like a kind of more, um, I suppose, more embodied and less like engaged in that like
mm.
analysis. There's probably a different way of like of putting it, but I think like certain personality traits or parts of us um can make recovery quite challenging
Yeah.
because of that like intensity of like needing to do things right, wanting to achieve or
Yeah.
be perfect.
That's a
Um,
great, yeah, that's a great point because I definitely experienced that in myself, and I think, yeah, I think it's helpful to become. I think that was where the self-compassion was really helpful for me was to see like where are certain ways of navigating this not actually being helpful because I think I was probably in that camp as well early on where I was before I kind of started to do more of the mind body stuff. It was like an intense focus on uh perfecting pacing and perfecting the right kind of diet, and like if I just got everything right, then I would recover. And interesting enough, as the process kind of deepened for me, it was seeing also why I was so caught up in that mindset. And it had so much to do with the repressed emotions because it was like the fear of what if I don't get something right. So yeah, I think it's a good thing to be aware of if somebody finds themselves in this kind of a mindset, maybe to ask yourself like, uh, is that serving me in this approach? And again, like going back to the parts, it's quite helpful to not go to war with yourself, but just to be
mhm.
like, okay, thank you, like analytical mind, you're good for, if I need to do some number crunching or do that, but in this process, you can like take a break. And I think that's what I was doing as well. It was like, okay, take a break, the controller, fixer, manager, and like let's go into the acceptor, the allower, the kind of, yeah, just being with things as they are.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think like I was the same with pacing. I think it's actually really hard because
Mm,
when someone tells you when like the general advice is like you should pace and that this is like you need to pace your energy and then you need to like slowly increase and like like if you're a perfectionist, it's like a recipe for disaster because it's
absolutely.
like it's one of those things that just like it doesn't line, or at least for me anyway, it didn't line up I was
Yeah,
like, okay,
yeah.
I've like been sticking to the book with my
Yeah.
pain. And like, why am I still feeling like this? Or like, why do I feel worse when like I've kind of reduced what I was doing? Like it just
Mm,
wasn't making sense. And then, especially if you're like going into that problem solving mode or trying to do it even better, it can be really hard because you get yourself into a
mm.
knot, like trying to do it better when actually, or
Yeah.
trying to understand it when actually maybe the concept behind it is like more about, I think it's more about like on the basis that it's to try and help people um
Mm,
manage their energy and like avoid exacerbating symptoms rather than like how to actually like understand what's behind symptoms and
yeah.
actually reduce symptoms in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's like you said, it's the worst nightmare for somebody with like kind of a mind because you can endlessly get yourself in a knot with it. And I think, I think looking back for myself, it maybe had its purpose in exhausting me to and opening me up to other approaches, where it was like, okay, that part of me tried its best to solve my way out of this illness. And and I think it had to be exhausted some way or another to kind of break me down to the point of then hearing somebody in like a recovery story say, I recovered through kind of this mind body approach, and I'm like, okay, I'm ready for anything now because um, that part of the mind got exhausted. So yeah, I think good to be aware of. Uh, yeah, that's it's not about perfecting pacing, and I like you said, I think for some people, uh, pacing can be a helpful concept to be like, if I'm constantly running myself into the ground with my energy, it's going to overwhelm me with symptoms and all of that. But I think many people end up in the other camp where uh, it becomes your sole focus for recovery. So I like to like share the concept of intuitive pacing. It's like don't get caught up in the perfection like camp. Just kind of try things and then trust okay, that was a bit too much. Kind of like how you mentioned you did with the running as well. It's like, yeah, sure, it's gonna bring up symptoms a lot, but now you have tools to work with it, and then maybe sometimes you take it a bit slower. And I think this is the best approach for people rather than the one that many people focus on. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's about like what you can add to the idea of pacing, that like what factors you can consider in the mix that will help with it, like considering like your level of fear before doing something, like is it
Mm,
actually
mm,
too far out of your comfort zone?
mm,
Then that's like maybe doing too much. Or if it's like maybe out of your comfort zone, but not too far out of your comfort zone. Like that level of fear might change on a day-to-day basis or on a week-to-week basis, depending on stuff that's going on, or like how
mm,
much energy you might have after something to respond to symptoms increasing is also like a good indicator, like how much should I do today?
mm.
I think like it's like the mind body approach. I know some people have told me they don't like stories where someone like has a really quick recovery and they start like, doing lots of activities straight away because to them that seems like too unrealistic or like
Yeah.
they can't see how that would work for them. And I suppose it's like the mind body approach isn't about just like pushing through or just
Mm, mm,
ignoring like what's going on in your body. It's more about, like you say, intuitively
mm.
moving forward at a pace that's going to be right for you or that's going to work well for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Those are some nice points that I haven't heard before, which is nice to add some things that people can do when I say, okay, intuitive pacing, and then you can be like, okay, but what's that? It's nice to have those. I like what you said about the fear, where you can be like, okay, uh, how much fear am I feeling before doing this? And then if it's too much, maybe I could do something that brings up a little bit less fear. But yeah, it's not about letting the fear completely stop you from doing things, but it's good. And then to, yeah, focus on your energy afterwards. So I like that kind of adding a little bit to the intuitive pacing. Um, yeah. So how how did things kind of finish up for you with the recovery phase and then what are you up to now? So I see obviously you've got the YouTube channel, you're doing some coaching. Like how did that transition happen?
Yeah, so I suppose it was quite I suppose it was quite to use the word intuitive again. Like I
Mm,
suppose as I was like slowly improving, I was thinking like actually this is somewhat similar to the work I've done before in terms of like helping people. It's a different
right,
model.
yeah.
I was like, oh, like maybe I could do work like this. Um, and I did give it time. So I started to do the YouTube videos like earlier before I started doing the coaching. So there
Mm,
was maybe like 6 months of just doing videos. And um, yeah, even that was an interesting experience because
mm,
I don't know what it's like for you, but like I'm not a normally a social media person at all.
yeah.
It's not something I normally would have thought of doing. Um, but like it's nice to share ideas, and I sort of felt like I would have been really grateful to hear some of these ideas. I know not everyone likes,
Can trigger people
everything I say in
sometimes.
my videos. But like certain things that if you can pass it on to help other people, like yeah, just that it's really rewarding to be able
Mm,
to see that like some of what you share or some of the coaching that you offer can like help someone's recovery speed up or
yeah.
help them understand how to apply the approach in a more personalized way for them. Um, and so I think, um, yeah, so I kind of just took it pretty gradually. And then because it was working for myself, there's a benefit in that in terms of like you can decide how much you take on at a given
Mm,
time and like gradually increase what you're doing. And I suppose like now, um, because of doing this work, I suppose it's really in some of the ideas are really ingrained.
yeah,
So like
yeah,
I feel like it's helped me as well.
yeah.
Um and like now and again I'll get like I've got a sore shoulder at the moment and I know it's my I know it's my body pain.
Mm,
Um but like but the nice thing about that is like it doesn't yeah, like I know it's just like something I can be curious about and
yeah.
interested in and like reflect on and um yeah, and because I had chronic pain before the long COVID, I like the chronic pain came up in the form of injuries that wouldn't go away. So I
Mm,
had an ankle injury for 5 years and then I had a foot injury for 5 years. And so I wasn't able to run for a really long time. So actually, like since being well again now, I've been able to run and I
mm.
did the triathlons over the summer, which was really fun.
Oh,
Um,
awesome.
and yeah, so I think it's been nice to, and also I had lots of food intolerances. So like
Mm,
just being able to eat everything again and like go to Italy and eat like, you know, anything I want
yeah,
is
yeah.
like yeah, it's sort of like little things like that that um make you really appreciate like the whole thing. Like at the
The
time
whole
of being
process,
unwell,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, at the time of being unwell, it's hard to
Yeah.
appreciate any of it. But I think now it's nice to kind of like yeah, see this like see
Yeah.
how far I've come, what
Yeah,
I can do
exactly.
now.
Yeah, and you have such a different perspective on things that might crop up in your life now. It's funny you mentioned about the chronic pain beforehand because I probably wouldn't have called it chronic pain at the time, but I also had these recurring injuries that weren't going away. Like I was big into the gym before, and it's funny. This started just before I got long COVID, and I can look back now and very much see how it was the mind body stuff, like these repressed emotions that were first coming out in. Um, these kind of injuries and be like I used to go to the gym a lot and then I started getting this really bad knee pain and I went to so many doctors like sports physios and we tried all these things and it wasn't going away, so I stopped going to the gym and then I got a shoulder injury, and I stopped doing this and this was before I even had COVID. So I was already kind of, yeah, going into the space that was more limiting. And then same thing, it's beautiful to have been through this whole process, having forced into doing all of that kind of inner work, uh, processing what needed to be processed, and then coming back on the other side, I'm like more capable of exercising and going back into the gym and doing whatever I want. And I think a huge part of it is like also the all these kind of health related fears have been processed as well, and to understand. I don't know. I just have such a great like trust in my body's ability to heal and do things now, where I can go to the gym and push myself pretty hard. And sure, sometimes it can be like quite intense. Kind of something actually mentioned, you can have like the shoulder pain, and I could have like a wow, that was a really hard gym session. But it's so different having been through that whole process, having worked through all those fears to be like, yeah, and it's fine. You know, maybe I would kind of sit and feel into what's there. You've got the tools now. And I think, yeah, this is the same when you can look back on it and be like, uh, what a gift, you know, but it doesn't feel like that when you're in it. It can be pretty brutal. So yeah, but I guess maybe for anybody who's in it, it's worth doing the work as much as you can because um, it's it's powerful. It helps you in many ways. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and it can take, like, depending on the person, there can be different challenges that arise, and it can
Mm,
take a long time. But I also think like it's nice to look at it as like an ongoing learning,
mm,
or like that it's not like a process that just has an end point.
yeah.
Um, there's always more to learn, or like a symptom might crop up again, and the benefit is it won't have maybe the same impact. You won't maybe have the same level of fear, or it won't kind of all spiral out of control, but you'll still like, yeah, use tools or
Yeah.
like reflect on what's going on. Um, and I think that's like even just knowing like that that's always possible. Like there's always going to be some solution.
Mm,
Um, for me anyway, it gives me a lot of like what's the word? Um, yeah, just self-assuredness that like,
mm,
oh, like everything's gonna be fine,
yeah, yeah.
like much more certainty around, I know not every health condition or symptom is mind body, but like
Yeah,
certainly
yeah.
if something comes up that's mind body, I'll figure something out.
Yeah, you have like a greater trust in your own resilience where you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm capable of a lot more than my mind would have originally thought. I think it's a really good point, like you said, to point out that don't look for like a finish line or something like that because there's this and because you'll also I've noticed this in my own mind where you'll kind of get very caught up then when something does come up again and then you can start to question like, oh, have I done something wrong or is this that, because I found this. You'll also be exposed to different triggers as you kind of open yourself up more to life that you weren't when you were in more of a kind of closed off phase. It was exactly the same as me. It's like I needed that space to not have any external pressures to be able to focus on my inner healing, the same way you mentioned. But then the more I started to do things again and started to exercise a lot, and I went traveling and started to work here and there, it brought up all sorts of different things in my body and like, phases where I was like pretty pushing myself quite hard. Uh, yeah, as like but you know how to work through it. You kind of have this, but I think having an openness to like if something's coming up, then that's okay. It doesn't mean you're like completely messed up the whole process. You can have ups and downs and all sorts. And I think not having that kind of pressure and label on yourself of like, okay, yeah, I'm fully recovered, and now I need to
Yeah.
maintain that, And if I have a symptom, I need to pretend it's not there or
Yeah.
something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it kind of adds more pressure,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it makes maybe it's like more of a, I don't know, contracted energy than if something does
Mm.
come up, or it's harder to address it with a like a relaxed attitude. But
Yeah.
like certainly for me as well, like there's been certain triggers even since recovering, like say getting a virus or getting
Mm-hmm.
I had a like bad stomach bug at one point, and like it only lasted for 24 hours at most. But then I was tired for the rest of the week. And
Yeah.
like I had like a voice in my head that was like, but why are you tired? But you
Yeah.
shouldn't
Yeah.
be tired. Like, but that doesn't make sense. Even though like other people that I knew who had just got the same virus and were unwell were tired too, but it was like it's like a part of me that really doesn't like accept being unwell or like see
Mm-hmm.
something really wrong with like having a symptom.
Mm.
So it's like, but it was just really interesting because I was
Yeah.
like, oh, like yeah, just noticing that that was like
Yeah.
a big yeah, it was like putting a lot of pressure on me, even though there
Yeah.
was no need, and I was just going to get better within like a week or
Yeah.
something. Yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting. I can definitely relate to that. And I think it's, to have the perspective, we just learn this, I guess, as it happens. But it was the same for me to look back after something like this, where I would, I traveled a lot recently and really kind of run myself down. And then I got sick. And then it's, looking back, it's helpful to bring out any kind of uh, deeply rooted like health fears or whatever, patterns there might be. Um, to see it, like you said, like almost in a curious, interesting way. Like, oh, look at how much or like look, for me it was often interesting to see like, oh look, some fear can still be triggered somewhere in the back where it's like you said, like what why? Is there something here? And I always like to come back to the perspective of um just trust that that's revealing something to you, this
yeah,
is allowing me to see something that I wouldn't have seen if all these challenging life circumstances hadn't cropped up. Like if I hadn't got this virus at this time, I would never have seen this kind of very deep rooted little bit of fear or resistance, or this like deep little bit of emotion work that only came about because of life's triggers. So I think
yeah,
um yeah, that's a nice thing to be open to after kind of being in that recovered phase where you trust that you can do things and you can expose yourself, and then just to be open, like, okay, what is life going to show me is still here. It's like make
yeah,
yeah, be open.
yeah. And I think it's like there's lots of ways as well that I've realized my like I can like coping strategies that I have for not being aware of emotions, like
Yeah.
working, not distracting myself. So it's interesting because other things as well as symptoms can be like a a habit that you'll get into
Mm,
that's like not being like actually addressing what's like
yeah.
going on. Um and but the awareness of it is like the key
Yeah.
thing, and the awareness of like that voice or those like fear related thoughts, it's just like noticing them, having a bit more of like a perspective on what's
Yeah.
going on. Like, yeah, that's good.
Mm,
So it's such a like, even though it's such a hard thing to go through to be unwell, like
mm,
definitely there's a lot like of good things that can be learned.
mm.
Um, in terms of using this approach and just self-awareness.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I love that because I had the same, and it's interesting. You can see all of these habits and coping mechanisms, and the key word is awareness, like you said, because in the past you would have been doing them unconsciously. It's like, oh, okay, um, I'm doing this, like I want to get away, or you don't even feel like you want to get away from something, but it's just like I'm stressed, so I have to do this or I have to do that, and it can be quite curious on the other side. I've had it many times myself where it's like there's this pull to distract through one way or another, whether it's through exercise or work or whatnot. It was almost like being aware of it, but like letting it play out to kind of see what's underneath it. So it's like, okay, because I like that for the self-compassion bit as well. It's like, okay, you don't need to be perfect. Like there's distraction is coming up, but the awareness is key. It's like, okay, I'm distracting myself. Like I'm honest. This is a coping mechanism. Let it play out a bit. And then often for me, it would reveal at some point, whatever was underneath it would kind of come up. I'd often see it as like the old coping mechanism would like come up first, and then like what it was reacting to would come up underneath. Um,
Mm.
but it's interesting to have this completely different perspective on it. Whereas in the past we would just be that we would be in the coping mechanism. Whereas now you see it, there's still that momentum, but it's like I almost think that's key to releasing it as well, is to kind of have it come up uh, in a space of awareness, and then you kind of lose the it loses some momentum and habit force. Yeah,
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I was like with sport, definitely that in the past was my like coping mechanism or
yeah,
like something I just do. So now like whenever I notice like I'm having a thought about doing some sport that like on a day after I've already done a lot, I might be like,
yeah.
like this is interesting. Why am I thinking about doing that?
What's this actually about?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but it's yeah, and like I suppose as well you can I don't know what your experience is, but like you can notice patterns in other people as well, where like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
probably really common. Like mind body symptoms are much more common, I think, than people
Mm,
realize. And also like certain patterns or habits as ways to, distract from things that might be going
yeah,
on. And I mean, if people aren't curious about it, then it doesn't like it
yeah,
doesn't matter, I suppose. But it's like it certainly gives you a different perspective for yourself.
yeah,
And it's like being much more in control of your life than
yeah.
like when you're unconsciously doing all these things to try
Mm.
and like distract from emotions and other experiences.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I like that point because it's definitely something I've noticed is where you're so much more aware of this kind of stuff in other people. But it's key, like you said, if someone's not really curious about it, it's almost kind of puts you in a difficult spot sometimes, or just like, how to engage with someone where like I've noticed a lot with like family members where they'll be like, so a lot going on in their life, and all of a sudden they're having this really intense like tooth pain or this really intense like whatever, and it's like, oh, it's this old injury, and then they'll go search for this method, and it's like you can only offer, I've offered my perspective on it sometimes, and then it's like, okay, it's everyone has to go down their own path. But it is interesting, you see everything in a very different light, and it is very empowering as well, like you said, where you realize, one, you're not doing everything so unconsciously, and two, for myself, there's just so much more, kind of to go back to what we were saying earlier, like trust, like not need to run to the doctor for this and for that, and like, what's happening now. It's a much more of a trust, like, yeah, the body can have all sorts of aches and pains and this and that, but it's not often what it seems.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I really resonate with that. I've got some people in my life who've then they have no problem believing that I have mind body symptoms, but for them,
Right.
like, no, it doesn't apply to them. But like, yeah, I think, but then again, like sometimes it nearly needs to be like really, really severe and have such an impact on your life for you to even
Yeah.
be open to like thinking about this approach.
Yeah.
Um, or yeah, like everyone has their own kind of path of finding what's
Yeah.
gonna be useful to them. um but yeah, as you say, it's really empowering, I think. Yeah, and like it's an ongoing learning process, like there's lots to learn
Yeah.
and like realize along the way as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of I think it was Eckhart Tolle or somebody that said this quote, like, as much as you want to take somebody's pain away from them, it might be uh the best thing for them to have their own awakening or their own kind of uh wisdom. And it's so true in that kind of perspective of, sure, you can understand it in somebody else. Like, sure, you've got this mind body thing, but it's really only once we've kind of gone to the roots of it ourselves that, and for me, I see it as like so much of my ego had to be broken down before that perspective was a possibility. It was like life had to really kind of batter me around a lot. And then that's also why you can have the understanding of, yeah, you can share it with somebody, but you also know what it took to get there yourself,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. 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 And you can go through like, yeah, it can involve like a lot of change
Yeah.
to actually go get to that point, or like yeah, it comes back to also just having the right information at the right time, or like
Yeah.
being, I think also if you're like really, really struggling, like what you were sharing about pacing, like
Mm.
that it might have led you to a point that you were like so exhausted with that that
Yeah.
you were willing to try something else. It's kind of like that
Yeah,
as well.
exactly.
Like you need to hit a certain, sometimes need to hit a certain low in order to
Yeah. To open
try.
you up to other things, absolutely. Because our minds are stubborn otherwise, it's like, no,
Yeah,
not me.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
So what's your coaching like now? How do you work with people if someone's interested in working with you? What would that be like? And yeah.
Yeah, so my at the moment I offer one-to-one coaching. And I generally take a very personalized approach. So it's like depending on what someone is struggling with, like it could look very different for one person compared to another. Um, but
Mm,
yeah, it's just like thinking about various different aspects, like the role that fear cycle might play,
mm,
uh, to reflect on emotions. I don't know if it's the same for you, but I often get clients who will say like, "Oh, my symptoms out of the blue got much worse on like last Wednesday," and
mm,
um, like we'll explore together what that might have been. Like often it's hard, like it can be hard by yourself
mm,
to notice those emotional triggers. And so like taking a bit of time to reflect on like what else was going on that day and the day
mm,
before, and like could those experiences have impacted you in certain ways. Um
mm.
yeah, so I think that um and yeah, like I suppose it's yeah, like I say, different people will have different sorts of challenges, but I think
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
also being open to like being creative and figuring out like
yeah,
what might help or what might be getting in the way of
yeah,
the progress.
yeah. Yeah, I can definitely relate. Like it's not so much for me about this is the approach to kind of healing your chronic illness or that. It's much more about kind of engaging with someone and seeing what comes up. What is the
Yeah.
what needs to be seen, what needs to kind of be worked through. And I think it's just so helpful to have somebody who's uh, been through the process themselves. Kind of like you mentioned, you start talking to somebody, and you might have a very different perspective on what somebody's own perspective is on what happened. And often I've noticed people come to the realizations themselves if you kind of just have an open space of like, okay, let's explore uh, what that might have been about, or what's coming up, what's underneath that, and just kind of holding that open space. It's beautiful because people often, it's somewhere in there, but you can't see it on your own sometimes, where
Yeah.
it's very much
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think you can also like sometimes it helps to be able to like piggyback on someone else's trust that they can
Mm,
recover as well. Like having
yes,
someone
yeah.
else who can like who believes that you'll recover and
Mm,
like can trust that like this approach can work. And
mm,
also like having a space to talk about doubts and
yeah.
concerns that are coming up, like because if you're by yourself dealing with that it's hard,
Mm,
and then it can easily kind of spiral. So it's, I
mm,
think it's just nice not to be going through it all alone, and it's
yeah.
not always a simple process either.
Yeah.
Like it for some people they might get a book cure, but for many people it's quite a lot of work and being
Mm,
consistency, and yeah, it's like it can take time. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, the doubt point is a really good one because I often find as well. It's like when you're on your own, the doubt can seem so real. It can seem like we can so easily get entangled in it. And then to have somebody that can say, hey, yeah, I can see you're having a lot of doubt, whatever. I think that's often just the most reassuring. I've had that so many times where I often feel like someone will come out of the session and, maybe from my side, we were just having a conversation. I was sharing my perspective and they're like, wow, that was so reassuring, so helpful. Because like you said, having been through the whole thing, you can have a very different perspective on that's doubt. That's how the mind works. You're gonna have
Yeah.
those really intense phases where the doubts are gonna come, the fears are gonna come, but uh it's okay. Like you just don't need to believe it and completely identify with it. Yeah.
Yeah, and just normalizing that because I think
Yeah,
like
exactly.
it's like often such a huge part of the process for a lot of people, like for nearly
Mm,
everyone, like fear and doubt will
mm,
be cropping up all of the time. So it's just like reassuring people that that is normal and that like it's okay
mm,
and it doesn't mean they're, gonna go backwards or not recover, just
mm,
it's just how you deal with that.
mm.
Sometimes there's like trying to fix it, trying to get rid of those things that
Yeah.
are our natural instinct. But it's
Yeah.
like, how can it be okay for that to be there and to just like continue to trust that actually it is, it's
Mm,
going to work out.
mm. Yeah, that's such a good point because it's so easy to see doubt as the problem, and it's a problem if we've identified with doubt, but it also doesn't mean that you need to fix it or get rid of it. It can just be like, I can see that there's doubt in my experience, but I don't actually have to do anything about it. And like you said, our minds, to realize how our minds just so often want to isolate us, like, and create like a very separate identity where it's like I'm the only one that like has this amount of doubt or fear. So to really normalize that is key, I think. So yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. It's such a common experience.
Yeah.
And it's difficult. It's not easy to kind of have doubts all the time.
Yeah, exactly. It's okay. Well, Lucy, thank you so much for coming on to have this conversation. It's been a lot of fun, and I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was so nice to chat, and it sounds like we've both had really similar experiences, even though we
Yeah,
kind of got there in different ways. Like it's really nice, yeah, to connect and hear
yeah,
what you're talking about as well.
yeah. That's why I love these conversations. It's really cool to on the other side engage with people and kind of see how different yet similar the journeys can be.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
Awesome. So for people that want to get in touch with you, what would you recommend? I'll obviously put all your links below the video. So I'll put your website, I'll put your YouTube channel. Is there anything else?
Yeah, that's it. I can send you my inst link for Instagram as well. But yeah, generally just my website, YouTube, Instagram.
Awesome.
And people can feel free to reach out and ask a question or yeah, get in contact if they'd like to.